When I first heard this flat earth subject, I dismissed it without even giving it a second thought. But more recently, at the beginning of 2015, I ran across a few flat earth videos again. And while looking into the fake moon photos circulating around, I saw that people were claiming that the images from Earth from space were fake as well. Pretty soon the flat earth subject became viral online. And after looking at the Apollo missions one night and coming to the conclusion that they were nothing more than a huge con game, it jarred my memory about something. And for a very specific reason, I decided to look deeply into the flat earth without just dismissing it blindly as so many do. Why did I look into it this time?
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond.
No, that's not true!
The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore.
No, that's not true!
We used to, but we destroyed that technology.
No, that's not true!
And it's a painful process to build it back again.
No, that's not true!
Well, I do pray for knowledge and wisdom and discernment, but maybe the recent Apollo footage I watched helped. However, I live near a very large lake, Lake Ontario, and I happen to remember going to the beach as a kid and looking across the lake and seeing New York State coast off in the distance. I never ever thought anything about it ever, except I remember it being there when I went to the beach. Now, I've been to that beach 100 times over the years. And once this topic gained more prominence in early 2015, the first video I saw explained the curvature of the Earth and what it's supposed to be in inches per mile. And it resonated with me because I remember that I could see clear across the lake to the other coast, something that broke all the sphere Earth rules. So with NASA fakery on my mind and the memory of seeing this coastline that supposedly was too far below the horizon for me to be able to see it due to the curvature of the Earth, I re-examined the flat Earth theory. And as unbelievable as it seems, it started to make a lot of sense, especially since I did distinctly remember being able to see that far coast, basically anytime I was at my local beach. And as I've said, I've been there hundreds of times over the years. But even so, I went back to the beach recently and stood at the shore. I looked south and guess what? I could see the New York State coastline just like I remember. Now I googled the distance and it was approximately 36 miles. I learned what the curvature of the Earth is supposed to be exactly at that distance, and according to the people that believe in the sphere, I found out that the coast should have been buried below my ability to see it by almost 900 feet. That part of the New York State coast had a top elevation of less than 300 feet. So that left at least a huge 600-foot discrepancy, and even more because I could see some of the height of the far shore. Was something really wrong with the reality that they've been selling us ever since we were born? Well, I ended up becoming a little fixated on proving or disproving the concept. And at first I truly thought disproving the flat Earth would be rather easy. I thought there had to be a reasonable explanation why I could see so far beyond the so-called curved barrier. I learned about light refraction and superior mirages. I learned about perspective and horizons. I learned about how our eyes work. I viewed dozens of similar experiences on YouTube. I listened to experts and people who thought they had logical but spherical explanations. In fact, I tried for a few months to debunk the concept and just couldn't. The more I looked into it, the more sense it made, and the less likely that the sphere model we've been spoon-fed since birth was a reality. It's just flat out wrong. And as more people shared their experiences and proofs online, it only added to my growing, pretty much unwavering belief that the world is not what we've been told. And learning about how our eyes work and how perspective work helps a lot with understanding sunrises and sunsets and ships disappearing hull first at sea and other supposed sphere Earth proofs. I can't say for certain what shape the Earth is or how big it is, or if there's an Antarctic ring or a barrier beyond it, or if it's an infinite plane. Maybe everything we theorize is not complete. There are so many possibilities that it blows the mind, and the flat Earth has no real complete standard model because it's all based on us finding out things for ourselves. We agree on the facts and certain basics, but the rest is only hypothetical even if it seemingly makes sense. And as the evidence mounts for both the flat Earth and against the sphere, I wanted to create a special place where folks can learn and share what they've learned with other supporters. Differences of opinion are certainly going to come forth and should be expressed openly. But remember that the goal of my videos and their corresponding threads is to provide the opportunity to use each of us to learn and grow in any area that any of us has a problem in. If there is a thing you can't understand, then ask. Someone will have an opinion and we can go from there. If you have a point to make against what is considered an accepted flat Earth fact, please provide any relevant links or supporting proofs or videos. I am currently under the impression that the entire space program, even low Earth orbit, and all that is there, is really just a sleight-of-hand trick by a group of illusionists that have swindled the public, the governments of the world, the media, and us into believing a lie. Everybody, a small group of corporations and cabals have almost complete control over the entire financial, educational, high-level governmental and media systems, leaving it up to real armchair scientists and normal people that can critically think and recreate experiments themselves to independently prove or disprove any accepted line of thought about our reality. Look, I ain't the smartest man on the flat Earth, but I ain't no dummy. I'm educated, and I never ever questioned or ever thought of an alternative to a sphere Earth until this year. It never entered my mind to question this part of our reality at all, ever. But now I question everything. I'm a Christian, and I think I see the big picture.
It is the most marginalized, ridiculed, censored, and hidden fact in history. If this fact was made known to the world at large, just this one fact has the power to completely transform the world and everyone in it for the better, holistically, in a myriad of ways. Our rulers are well aware of this, and that is exactly why this truth has been held from us so expertly for so long. It is about the truth of who we are, where we come from, the actual position and significance of humans, Earth, the sun, moon, and stars. The fact is, the Earth is flat and motionless. That is all. And that is the revelation that will finally break the matrix. You have been taught from the earliest ages that you live on a spinning ball, that NASA has sent men to the moon, that satellites are hovering in perpetual orbit overhead, that an international space station contains astronauts free-floating above us, that the Earth is a ball that tilts, wobbles, spins on its axis, and revolves around the sun, and that all these, and you, are the result of a Big Bang cosmogenic explosion 14 billion years ago which created everything out of nothing. Yet nothing could be farther from the truth. The truth is simple and easily proven. You can see for yourself. The horizon is always flat, and you can measure using sextants, theodolites, and lasers to prove the Earth and its massive oceans have absolutely no curvature whatsoever. You can feel for yourself that the Earth beneath you is motionless, and you can measure, as Michelson, Morley, Gale, Sagnac, Airy, and other scientists have, to prove that the Earth is completely motionless. That's right. It has been long proven by several scientific experiments, even in the elitist peer-reviewed journals you critics constantly harp on about, that the Earth is a stationary plane. The reason you haven't heard about it before is because the media is controlled by the same people who created this deception. The only time you have ever heard a flat earther mentioned in the media, it was in jest or ridicule. The only thing you have ever heard about flat Earth is that its adherents are ignorant idiots. Sorry to burst your space bubble, but if you still think you're living on a spinning ball in 2016, you, my friend, are the ignorant one. Millions of people worldwide are waking up to this incredible rediscovery, and this flat Earth movement has the potential to bring about positive change on an unprecedented level. Like a balloon held underwater for 500 years, the momentum of truth rising to the surface is causing and will continue to cause huge ripples in the control system. As the spinning ball Earth is finally being exposed worldwide for the 500-year deception it was, Earth's entire population is suddenly being faced with the reality that every government, every space agency, university, secret society, religious organization, mainstream and alternative media outlet have all been duplicitous in propping up a monstrous manipulation to fleece and control the masses. The resulting mass mental exodus away from the control system is exactly what humanity needs. Once the flat Earth truth gets out, these lying politicians, spokesmen, reporters, and teachers suddenly change from being heralded voices of authority to being ridiculed, shunned, and denounced as they deserve. Once the flat Earth truth gets out, these governments, universities, media outlets, and other entangled organizations, which have long been hard at work weaving this multi-generational cosmological myth, suddenly and completely lose all credibility. Once the truth of our flat Earth gets out, so does the truth of these few elite families and societies who have kept this most important and fundamental reality from us for these hundreds of years. Essentially, once the flat Earth truth gets out, so does every other important truth by proxy, because this mother of all conspiracies holds under its umbrella literally all of the other conspiracies and exposes them.
So, Flat Earth for newbies. Flat Earth 101. When some people come to the Flat Earth for the first time, they can't quite grasp what our model looks like or how it works. This video is a very quick, basic understanding of the model with an emphasis on basic. The study of the Flat Earth by the masses, such as what is going on now, is being performed by amateurs such as myself and many others with absolutely no funding, and and it has really only been happening since maybe the beginning of 2015. While we find it rather easy to disprove the spherical Earth and the heliocentric model, we admittedly do not have all of our ducks in a row for the flat Earth model. And what I am presenting is in no way supposed to represent a complete working model or a mechanism behind the model. Now, with that understood, let's just take a look at what's going on here. So, what does the flat Earth look like? Well, the ocean's deepest point isn't really that far, and the Russians' super deep digging project only dug down about 8 miles or so. So I can't really tell you what's under the crust of the Earth, and believe it or not, we've only really gone up into the sky as high as maybe 20 or 30 miles. So I really can't tell you what's up there either, beyond what we can see with amateur rockets and weather balloon footage. Whatever we think is holding space away from the atmosphere of Earth is called, for lack of a better word, the firmament in the Bible, and it seems that it's bowl-shaped, like a dome. The stars seem to be in that dome, and the whole thing seems to rotate above us, right over the center of the disc-shaped Earth, which is the North Pole, spinning seemingly around Polaris every 23 hours, 56 minutes. So we might have trouble describing the underbelly or the heavens above, but we can get a picture, a basic idea of what the plane of the flat Earth looks like from old maps, from sailing records, and from first-hand reports. Now, as it turns out, it looks a lot like the UN logo, which is taken from a map projection called the azimuthal equidistant, or AE for short. For the flat Earth model to work, the Earth does not have to look exactly like this, but it's close enough so you get the idea. This is just a representation that most flat earthers use for now, until better data comes in. Now, as it stands, flat earthers do not believe that Antarctica is an actual continent at the bottom of the ball. We know that the ball is a hoax, meant to deceive people and keep the creator away from their thoughts. Antarctica is probably nothing more than a small part of the ice ring that jets out a little bit, or even maybe a comparatively small island, but it's not an actual massive continent island at the bottom of the ball. Now, there are bases there and people there at a place that they call Antarctica, and the public can even take tours there if they want and spend $5,000 or $10,000, but it's a heavily guarded, protected area, and there is a real treaty with the military presence stopping people from going there on their own. And they've even been caught faking 24-hour sun footage. But enough about Antarctica. That's a whole video on its own, to which there are plenty online to choose from. Now, looking down from above, the Earth would look like a circle with the North Magnetic Pole smack in the middle. Picture a dartboard or a CD or a disc. As you can see, the land masses are spread out all over the flat disc. And now imagine the land having a raised edge at the end, kind of like a pizza has. But we'll pretend the crust is made of ice instead, and it's several hundred feet high everywhere, which keeps the water in so it doesn't fall off the edge. And just to be clear, we are not even sure that there is an edge to fall off of, so to speak. The ice could go on forever or not, we just don't know. That edge is Antarctica, and it is not an island, but it's rather a ring of ice that surrounds the entire disk, and we're really not sure how deep it goes or what is out there. The sun and moon travel around the face of the Earth, as described, like the hands of a clock move around its face. And as a matter of fact, picture a circle around you as a 24-hour clock. If you point yourself due south with a compass and act as if that's 12 noon on the clock, then the sun's position in the sky will actually act like a giant clock hand and tell you what time it is. Now, this is based on 24-hour time, like I said, but the sun acts like the hour hand because the Earth is really a circle like clock face, and the sun takes 24 hours to go and circle around its 24 time zones. Now go outside and point due south and try it. Remember not to factor in daylight savings time. The moon likewise circles above us, but a little slower than the sun, giving us the phases and showing us the months. Together they are a real calendar. The light is cast on the earth, and how much of it you can see will depend on your position relative to it. Perspective accounts for sunsets and sunrises, which other videos will attest to in greater detail. The sun is simply moving too far away from the observer to see it any longer, as it gets smaller and disappears on the horizon. The light is cast from the sun onto the earth at different diameters depending on the time of year. And because the sun spirals in and out throughout the course of the year, this causes seasons. Let's start out roughly on September 21st. The equinox is where we supposedly have equal days and nights all over the earth. The sun travels over the equator on that day. Now, as the year progresses, the sun will spiral outwards, making even larger circles and maintaining the same 24-hour rotation. As it spirals outwards, the days get shorter, that's the daylight, and colder for each location north of its position, while to the south it gets longer, the daylight, and warmer. This maxes out on December 21st, while the sun is over the Tropic of Capricorn. The sun hangs out there for a few days, and then the sun starts its journey back the way it came, making tighter and tighter circles. Thus the south now gets colder and receives less daylight, while the north gets hotter and receives more daylight. The sun will continue this tighter spiraling pattern for 6 months, until it arrives over the Tropic of Cancer, which brings the hottest and longest days for locations to its north, and the opposite for those to its south. It likewise hangs out for a few days and then starts the pattern all over again. North is always towards the center of the map, no matter where you are on it. So if you pointed a compass due north, opposite of you would be due south. And because of this, east and west are never straight lines. They are always curving slightly, and our distance from the central pole would determine the amount that curve would be noticed. Now, on a flat map, Antarctica is not a continent on the bottom of the ball. It's an ice ring that surrounds the flat Earth. So Antarctica is the South Pole, or opposite to the North. And actually, if we picture a speaker magnet, that's kind of how it works. A magnetic center with an opposite outer ring. Magellan and Columbus did not prove a sphere. On the flat map, their travels are merely east to west, which are quite doable. They could continue one direction and get back to exactly where they started, just as this image details. Now, boats disappearing bottom first from the horizon are not really going over any curve of the Earth. It's perspective, and we have plenty of zoom footage on video to prove it. Gravity is density, weight, and buoyancy. It doesn't have to depend on a spinning Earth, as pseudoscience would have you believe. Now, science is wonderful, but astrotheology is not real science. They should stick to writing fiction instead of teaching their religion as a fact. In fact, it is the majority of flat earthers' opinions that most people out there really that still believe in the heliocentric lie. They don't know what they believe. And if they did, they probably wouldn't believe it anymore. See, the people that organize and run NASA, along with some of the leading so-called scientists in the world, with the help of the media and the educational systems that are controlled by the bad guys, have reinforced the heliocentric lie that was started a very long time ago. Of course, the church had a major role in this. Now it's had centuries and centuries to cultivate and prove itself, and the Flat Earth movement finally gained enough traction that in 1 year it almost dismantled the whole thing. I imagine that 2016 will be even larger, more viral, and the people of the world will no longer be able to avoid it or be shielded from it. So I ask you, are you ready for what's going to come next?
Okay, here's a little illustrator or a little cartoon from a website called timeanddate.com. It's really funny that they would have a perfect illustration of a sun rising and setting on a flat earth due to perspective. You'll notice that it rises from below the horizon and sets below the horizon. Now you might be saying, well, how's that possible? I can see now you're saying that it rises and lowers due to perspective, but how does it disappear below the horizon? Well, I got a theory about that. Because of the fact that all parallel lines and planes converge at your eye level horizon, this is according to the perspective, I'm not making this up, if in fact, and they do, they converge at your eye level horizon visually, then it makes sense that after that point, they diverge, meaning they then separate. So the sun would continue on a downward track. As you can see from my illustration here, the lines would go to your horizon, and then afterwards they would spread out and separate, kind of like a starburst, and the starburst being at your horizon, at your focal point.
Where is the curvature? Where? No curvature.
Tells us that we're not moving. Common sense tells us that we're not moving. Astrophysicists and space agencies have tried to con the world into believing their very satanic heliocentric lie. And they have done rather well up until now. But the cat's out of the bag, and this lie cannot continue forever. Rockets can't work in a vacuum such as so-called space. There's nothing to thrust against. There's no atmosphere for the fuel to push on for an opposite reaction to occur. So once we reach space under rocket power, we couldn't steer or accelerate or slow down or stop. Certain space agencies and astrophysicists and myth-busting hosts claim otherwise, but they've even published equations that prove otherwise. But while their equations probably declare that the rockets in space work, actually going through the math and performing the physical tests proves otherwise. And that's why we never see a rocket or even the highly televised shuttle missions actually enter this so-called vacuum called space. And while their equations preface certainly declares that they do, going through the math and performing the physical tests proves that rockets can't work in space. In stage one of these two similar experiments, a balloon is blown up and it's placed in the place of rocket fuel, and it's attached to the straw, and it's taped to a toy car. Now the balloon is released and the air travels through the straw, and the car is propelled forward as expected. In stage two, the two scientists will try to disperse the air that's coming out of the straw to act as the vacuum would in space. Let's watch these two-stage experiments unfold and see what happens when the atmosphere is removed from the equation. The person on the right tries it with a vacuum cleaner and misses on his first attempt to get it in exactly the right spot. The person on the left makes a paper deflector to show that the opposite reaction is based off the fuel pushing off the atmosphere outside the vehicle. The person on the right tries a few more times with the vacuum cleaner, and on his fourth attempt he gets it in just the right spot and the car doesn't move. He misses again on 5, but on number 6 he places the hose just perfectly, and once again the rocket car doesn't move even an inch. The contention is that this shows that the rocket is dependent on the atmosphere to push off of for its opposite reaction. The rocket needs an atmosphere to move. When we take away that atmosphere, the rocket doesn't move. On the left, deflecting the motion of the air rushing out of the straw shows that the opposite reaction needed for thrust is escaping fuel hitting the atmosphere. The person on the left releases the balloon, and the air rushes out and is deflected to the right and left, and the vehicle doesn't move forward. Rockets can't work in space. Before satellites were thought of, there were already technologies allowing us to send long-distance messages without wires. Ground-based systems for telephones and radio were being used by people on both sides of the pond. We were able to transmit through the atmosphere and skip signals off of the firmament, whatever that is, to the other side of the Earth using ham radios. There are many ham radio operators today and lots of clubs all over the world. Marconi sent a message across the Atlantic over, 100 years ago. And all technologies were well established and working fine using only ground-based operations. Today, we still use ground-based systems to connect to each other via cable television, phone lines, the internet with fiber optic, transatlantic cables, and RF towers. There's tens of thousands of huge RF towers used to broadcast all kinds of signals all over the world, and they're still being built in today's satellite age. Your cell phone signal has a limited range depending on who your provider is and how many towers their system is linked to. Even if satellites were real, they are simply not needed to do what they say they're doing. We can do it better and cheaper from the ground. People that work in the satellite field are really working on tangible things that really work and do what they say they're doing. But it is not what those techs and the rest of us are being led to believe, since space and everything up there is simply not as they're telling us it is. If there are devices up high in the sky helping with communications, then NASA probably reconfigures them to work wherever they want them to work. And maybe doing it with hot air balloons or some kind of secret advanced technology, but they're definitely not putting anything up in so-called space. Alright, so what have we learned so far? Well, we've learned that we really can't trust NASA and that they never went to the moon. That they faked everything, including weightlessness from zero-G high-altitude planes. They faked pictures of Earth from space, and that we never even went to space because rockets can't work in a vacuum. Of course, that starts to mess with people's minds because we can actually use electronic devices every day which supposedly depend on satellite technology up in space. Now, I've said this before, and I'm sure it'll say it again. The technology exists, but none of it is based up in space. There are no satellites orbiting the supposedly spherical Earth. And people working in the satellite technology, sure there are, but no one is denying that. But whatever is being done with that piece of hardware is not being strapped onto a rocket and shot into outer space. So I guess now it's time to take a look at satellites and see what's really going on and how we can make sense of satellite TVs and satellite phones and GPS and things like that. So here we go. Geosynchronous or geostationary satellites were actually a fictional creation of the famous science fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke, who was also a high-ranking Freemason. And about a decade later, they became a so-called reality that we all ended up paying for with our taxes and our higher bills for such things as cable and internet, things like that. So basically, a Freemason created a piece of fiction, and then all his compatriots convinced us all that it was tangible and a reality. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't people working on tech that is supposed to be satellite related. I'm saying that satellite tech does not go into space. Where they say satellites are actually located is in itself a work of fiction, like the concepts of warp speed and dark matter, multiple universes, or string theory. just to name a few. The Google Loon project plans to string hundreds of weather balloons all the way around the Earth at around the 40-degree south latitude mark, which has very little land and is mostly open ocean. They will be all the way around the Earth so that people living in the south can all get the internet, basically just as easily as those of us in the north, because most of the area down there is over ocean water, and there is no service over the ocean. Even though they say we have tens of thousands of satellites in orbit. 40,000 now, I think. Now this doesn't make sense if the heliocentric model is true. And it doesn't make sense if we have all those satellites in space. Plus, it'd be easier and cheaper just to send a few satellites up compared to hundreds of weather balloons that need to be constantly adjusted and maintained. So if satellites were real, why not simply use them? Of course, when we look at the coverage area on the flat Earth map, things start to make a little more sense. Many believe that our satellite communication and GPS, telephone, internet, etc. is not coming from space. Over the land, they use cell towers to bounce signals to and fro, but over the oceans they can't. However, over water, balloons, blimps, boats, and planes can bounce signals to and fro. Which is exactly what Google Loon plans to do, because space is fake and satellites are not up there. Satellites exist and function in some fashion, but they are not up in space orbiting the Earth. And Google Loon is a good example as to why. Plus, they could use those balloons for other reasons. GPS, black boxes, telephone service, TVs, and just about anything else that transmits digitally are examples. And we've been doing that sort of thing with dishes and towers long before satellites were theorized. In mainland USA, TV satellite dishes are almost always pointed at or near a 45-degree angle. It's towards the nearest ground-based repeater tower. If they were getting their signal from a geostationary satellite in space, then they should all be pointing at between 80 and 100-degree angles, which is basically straight up into space, since geostationary satellites, by very definition, match Earth's supposed spin and stay in one location. The constant 45-degree angle that almost all dishes in the mainland US are pointed to proves that they are picking up ground-based signals from repeater towers and not from geostationary satellites in space. Think about it, and then go have a look at a few dishes in your own area. What angle is your dish pointed to? Supposedly geosynchronous or geostationary communication satellites match the Earth's rotation, so that they seem like they are staying over one location at all times. If that's the case, then satellite communication should always work and never go out. But satellite TV and satellite internet and satellite phones do not work well in countries like Kazakhstan, for example, or in virtually any southern continental island where there are coincidentally only a few or no cell phone towers. Satellite tech does not work well in places where there are few cell towers compared to the US. But if they were where they say they are, way up in space, then we should always get a signal, regardless of the number of cell phone towers that a particular location has. Even the best satellite tech on Earth can't work without cell tower. Temperature is around 4,500 degrees where most satellites live. The components that make up a satellite cannot withstand that kind of heat, and they would literally turn into molten globs of metal pretty quickly. NASA has a little fast talk to try to get them out of this pickle, but they very clearly contradict their own words and set of laws by claiming that even though it is indeed really hot up there, these crafts don't feel it because the atmosphere is actually quite thin. How are they able to measure it to begin with, let alone be able to compare it to the surrounding area? They couldn't even last a minute in that kind of heat. NASA says that there are more than 20,000 satellites orbiting the Earth. Actually, it's 40,000, bringing us such goodies as satellite TV, GPS, cell phone signals, and weather information. And of course, pictures of the Earth from space. They admit, however, that all of their images from space are really just composites and strips of data that have been strung together to form images after being photoshopped to make them look appealing. Now, there are no real images from space, not even of the famous Blue Marble series from the Apollo missions. We've all seen the pics of Earth from space and satellites in schools, encyclopedias, and in history books, and they're all demonstrably fake. Green screens, layers, and CGI, and paintings, animations, models, and cartoons, but no real pictures. People claim to see satellites with the naked eye, even though they are only the size of a small bus or smaller and supposedly orbit hundreds or thousands of miles up. In reality, we all struggle to see a commercial plane relatively close to us at, 5 to 7 miles high due to the laws of perspective. We simply cannot see something that small from that far away, even if it had the most powerful set of lights ever invented strapped under it to its underbelly. Now let's have a look at some low Earth orbiting objects such as the International Space Station, or ISS for short. NASA says that the ISS orbits at only 250 miles high, but that is only 1/32 of the Earth's diameter higher than the Earth itself. And imagine an ant on a basketball. Raise that ant half an inch off the ground. And now look at that ball with the ant from the opposite side of that ant and see if you can see the ant, which you can't. Then the sun can't shine its light onto the ISS during the nighttime. The Earth itself would block out that portion of the sun's light from reaching the ISS. So how can we see a reflection of sunlight off of the ISS at night? Well, we can't. And the fact is that, at least for now, the truth community doesn't really know what's flying around up there, or how large it is, or how high up it is. And the fact that we can see some light from something at all means that it just cannot be the ISS orbiting at only 250 miles high. In my opinion, in lieu of what has just been stated, it's kind of ridiculous to think otherwise. Whether it's a satellite flying so far away that we can't possibly see it from Earth, or if it's the ISS flying too close to Earth so we can't see it at night, whatever it is we are seeing, that's not what we've been told. If it is a man-made object, we know that it's high up, but it's not in space. But for all we know, it's a natural body moving around like the wandering stars that they have tracked and named the ISS. Before satellites were thought of, there were already technologies allowing us to send long-distance messages without wires.
Operating 24 hours a day, numerous nations maintain a network of LORAN transmitting stations to service the major shipping lanes. There are a pair here, for example, Sisconsit and Bodie Island. One is known as the master station, the other is the slave. For a moment, consider these two stations operating as a synchronous pair, simultaneously emitting short pulses of radio energy. Leaving both shore stations simultaneously, a pair of pulses travel out into space, in all directions, at a constant speed, roughly 186,000 miles per second, or the speed of light. Plus, the pulse from the closer station will reach the ship an instant before the pulse from the other station. The Loran ship board gear measures this difference in time of arrival in millionths of a second, or microseconds. It simply determines how much longer one pulse takes to reach the ship than the other pulse. Now, this same time interval will be observed at many points within the range of the two shore stations. And when connected, these points form a hyperbola, known as the Loran line of position. To aid the navigator in obtaining a fix, specially prepared Loran tables and charts contain accurately plotted lines of position on the various time differences encountered in a particular area. Having one line of position, we then obtain readings from another pair of stations. An accurate fix is established at the intersection of the two lines of position.